Welcome back. You may be confused as to why I'm even posing this question if they're fixing power creep, because obviously we're getting newer units that just keep raising the ceiling of how far we could go with power creep. However, with newer units come newer skills, and I think that's going to be the main focus point here. Obviously, stronger units are releasing, but said units can also come with supportive capabilities, or as I just mentioned, new skills. This, by extension, can help raise the floor of older units or units that fell off the face of the earth. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I believe IS is taking an approach to fixing power creep as well as helping out older units that released in the past. And I'll be going over why I think that, as well as the skills introduced that help with this argument. Now, obviously, all the new skills aren't going to be fixing every issue, and there are still going to be prevalent issues in the game that still need work, but I believe they're doing a better job nowadays than they were back in maybe 2019, 2020, even 2021. So I basically just want to go over my thoughts on how I believe they're trying to fix power creep. Now, obviously, nothing is going to stop power creep. There are always going to be new units that just push the limits to the point where IS will have to introduce new things. For example, Fallen Edelgard, when she came out, was definitely a problem for a lot of people, but eventually they would introduce stuff like the Steady Breath Sacred Seal that would make it a lot easier to deal with her. And I think the same logic is applying to all sorts of banners that we've been getting this year. And I believe it started in January with New Year Reagan and Reeve. Comparatively to all the other skills we've been getting this year, I would say Crossbow Attack is definitely one of the more tame options that we got. However, it does open wiggle room for new types of playstyles. So, with Drive Attack, obviously you have to be within 2 spaces, but with Crossbow Attack you have a lot more freedom with your movement. Crossbow Attack raises the floor by giving more movement freedom, as you don't necessarily have to be within 2 spaces, but you still have to be within the cardinal direction, which I would argue they're both still easy, but the fact that you don't have to be within 2 spaces of a unit means that, again, you have more freedom with your playstyle. However, I think the main point of contention with January was going to be Reeve with his Argent Aura, which completely shuts down any extended movement that will be granted by stuff like Annette, Astrid, or even Yuri and Holy Knight Aura. It can be countered for sure, but it did provide a means of allowing units to not just reach across the entire map and then snipe a unit and then retreat. I will say, comparatively to all the other months following, this was definitely one of the more lighter ones, and you could argue that maybe this isn't raising the floor per se, but the fact that these 2 things existed in January means that it did allow more wiggle room with playstyles, which I do think helped out with a bit of the power creep. However, I think once we go into February, we see a bit more of that come into play. February came out and we got the Valentine's banner, and that came with Savvy Fighter and Piercing Tribute. Now, we did end up with Valentine's Crom, which, if anyone knows, is really stupid, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that they introduced Savvy Fighter and Piercing Tribute. For the longest while, fast armors really didn't have a place in the meta because speed was most notoriously known for their dump stat, so when they were reducing their bulk just to have more speed, it meant that their saving capabilities were a lot weaker. However, with Savvy Fighter in mind, now they have the ability to not only get damage reduction, but they also have full no follow-up in the enemy phase, which is fantastic because now they can function as a save unit, and they could bypass stuff that other slower save armors were not able to. So with that in mind, they were at least able to make faster armors a bit more viable. And Piercing Tribute, while not nearly as impactful in my opinion, still provided enemy phase no follow-up, meaning that you could bring this to something like Aether Raids and stop all sorts of guaranteed follow-up attacks from units like Legendary Sigurd with guaranteed follow-up attacks. It was one of the reasons why null follow-up was definitely more prevalent, not only because you could secure your own doubles, but you're stopping guaranteed follow-ups, which I think was a bigger problem, mainly because if they were to get more than one attack on you, then it was always possible that you take too much damage, and at that point you may end up falling in combat. And for that reason, I did put Piercing Tribute on here. And then we had the Binding Blade banner, which was whatever in terms of new skills, but we did get Rainax with Gonzalez, which does allow units to act a bit more supportively and can allow older axe units to catch up in terms of damage output, because it basically grants attack speed +5, but also because it acts as a rain during combat, it does allow it to act supportively, meaning that you can just slap it on a supportive axe unit and call it a day. And then outside of that, we had Legendary Sheeta, who came with Distant Storm, which I believe allowed Vantage units to make a bit of a comeback. Not all of them per se, I would say mainly the dual phase Brave ones, because you're basically getting 10 additional attack from that skill, and you're still able to counterattack regardless of the foe's range. Obviously, it can still benefit units like Ares, Eldigan, yada 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 yada, but now they don't have to sacrifice stats because they have to run distant counter. They can still get stats and have the ability to counter regardless of the foe's range, which I do think helps with vantaging overall. And that was pretty much it for February. Then we get into March, which I believe was the most impactful month so far of this year. Starting us off, we had the Spring Banner with Flow Flight and Speed Res Hold. Flow Flight is another one of those skills that provides player phase no follow-up, which is really nice for player phase flyers. Flow Flight, while locked to melee flyers, does allow player phase flyers to safely initiate more often, because not only does it provide even more damage, but it also provides damage reduction, which can be really good in case you go up against foes that may otherwise take you out. We also got introduced to 3 ranged reigns, which are fine. I wouldn't say this is exactly raising the floor by too much, but it does provide even more support, meaning that you have more flexibility with your position, which is really nice. But then we get to the Thracia banner, and in my opinion, this is where a lot of the floor started to get raised, as each unit was either able to provide some sort of supportive capability, or they provide a new skill that allowed for units to catch up. Starting with August, who is able to provide a guaranteed follow-up. Granted, his weapon is mainly there for summoner duels, as his other effect relies on the unit dying, but the base effect is able to provide a guaranteed follow-up to any unit he has supported, which in turn provides a more combat presence. We also had Rainsword with Galzus, and I already went over that with Gonzalez, but it's the same thing with swords. Karen provides Allied Lance, which is just Love Candelabra, but for lances. So now lances have more supportive capabilities, but I believe Vital Astra is what raised the floor significantly for infantry melees, as now they're able to get both damage reduction and no follow-up, provided that they have the speed for it. Obviously, this isn't going to fix the slower ones, but now the faster ones have more toys to work with, as God Swords and all the like were falling off significantly, because usually you had to choose in between. You couldn't get no follow-up and spurn, and units were just hitting way too hard. And then with the existence of saves, it just kind of removed the idea of having one unit take everything when you could just run specific units to counter specific threats. But with Vital Astra, now units are able to get both damage reduction and no follow-up, as I mentioned. So it did provide a bit of a resurgence, but obviously there was going to still be issues. But then we also had Vulture Tome from Salem, and this is especially important since there aren't a lot of inheritable red tomes that allow them to compete. So with the existence of Vulture Tome, it does allow them to actually stand out a bit more, and I'm all for that. And that's pretty much the month of March though. And then we get to April, which honestly provided a good amount of stuff too. We had the Young banner, which provided speed defense tempo with Young Mia and Distant Dart with Young Ike. Distant Dart is especially important because it doesn't inflict chip damage on the unit, which was one of the biggest issues with Distant Pressure. You would be spurn tanking, but you would be gradually losing HP, which in turn lowered your overall survivability, which was a problem. Now with Distant Dart, you just get the speed, and you don't have to worry about taking damage as a result. Speed Defense Tempo also provides nullification to guard effects and breath effects, meaning that you can slap this on something like a bow unit and have easily accessible Deadeye procs with no issue whatsoever. It's still going to compete with the likes of No Follow-Up, but when paired with Brave effects, you're basically allowing units to provide even more damage output, which is really, really nice. Outside of the Young banner, we had the Genealogy banner, which didn't really come with anything outside of a Vulture Tome on Arthur. Granted, it's 5-star locked, and it's not really anything new, but now it's in the normal pool and it's a bit more accessible, which is why I did put it here. However, I don't think anything compares to Canto Control. For the longest time, we obviously had to deal with stuff like Yuri, Brave Erica, anything with Fixed Canto, or anything with Remaining Canto. It was very threatening. But now with Canto Control being accessible, we are able to shut down a lot of these threats. You can still counter this by taking out the unit in question with Canto Control, but it does provide a means of countering these types of skills. Also, because it's infantry locked, it does raise the value of infantry dancers that may not have anything going for them outside of being able to dance, as they're now able to provide even more utility. And that's pretty much it for the month of April. May was also pretty impactful with the Fallen banner. Fallen Lilith was probably one of the best things they could have done to allow units to catch up. Obviously, a lot of the work is going to be done by Lilith. However, because she's able to provide no follow-up support to anyone who's fast enough, it not only frees up a lot of their slots, but now it can be access to all sorts of classes, including ranged flyers, and cabs, meaning that they're not going to struggle nearly as much in combat. Obviously, this effect can be provided to even more broken units, however, it does raise the floor for other units that may not have been able to do anything otherwise. She also comes with Speed Smoke 4, which does rely on entering combat to get the damage reduction properties. However, similarly to the no follow-up effect, you could slap this on a ranged flyer, for example, or any ranged unit, initiate combat, and then you have damage reduction ready to go. And this is really nice since they weren't able to get damage reduction skills outside of units such as Flame or Elamine, so now their survivability is a lot higher. I would say one of the biggest winners with Speed Smoke 4 was Brave Claude, because one of the biggest issues was him just living. So now with Speed Smoke 4, he has a better shot at doing that. Attack Smoke 4 is also a notable skill to highlight because it shuts down any sort of follow-up attack. This can be shut down with no follow-up and guaranteed follow-up skills, but for slower units, it means they're taking less damage overall, which is really, really nice. And then outside of that, we have Attack Res Hold, which is just nice for supportive capabilities. And we have Flow Force, which is another flow skill that provides player phase no follow, but it neutralizes any penalties to attack and speed, meaning you don't have to necessarily worry about buffing your attack and speed as there's no risk involved. Then we get to June, which we're still in, but there's still a couple of things worth highlighting. We have Allied Sword from Kent and Vulture Sword from Guy. Allied Sword, similar to Allied Lance, just provides even more supportive capabilities for units that may have otherwise been supportive in nature, so that's great on its own. You also have Vulture Sword, which similarly to the Vulture Tomes, does allow older sword units who may have an outdated PRF to at least perform a bit more adequately in combat. Obviously, modern day PRFs are going to be a lot better, but with these type of inheritables going around, the discrepancy in power creep isn't nearly as bad. But obviously, it's still going to be noticeable. And then we just got the Summer banner with Summer Edelgard and Summer Alencia. Assault Troop is pretty interesting. I haven't seen anything of the sort with Assault Troop as of yet, but I do think there is potential there, as it does allow for more player phase oriented playstyles. So one of the biggest things that came to mind was Gale Force Armors, which should be apparent because Summer Edelgard is a Gale Force armor. But it also works on infantry units, flying units, and cav units, which is interesting because I thought they would just limit this to armors, but that's aside the point. I think there's potential here with this. I won't outright say this raises the floor for all units, but it does allow for player phase armors to come back with a bit of a resurgence. And then the final skill that we got was Whitecap Bow, which is just a really fantastic Brave Bow. All the other Brave Bows do come with an SP penalty, meaning that you can't really run this in modes such as Arena. However, this weapon is entirely different. It does rely on having an HP condition and having 10 more speed over the foe, but given the fact that it's basically a 17 might player phase Brave Bow, it does allow a lot of speedy bows to actually function a lot more in the player phase, which is something that honestly I really appreciate. The infantry ones were already fine with Ninja Yumi, so this is already just a bit of a step up, but when you compare it to stuff like cavalry units or flying units, now they have a bit more of a player face presence, which is why I do appreciate this skill. And outside of that, I believe this is how they've just been trying to fix power creep levels. Obviously, we're going to keep getting more and more power creep, and things are just going to keep pushing the limits. But I think if they keep introducing skills like these, then the discrepancy isn't going to be nearly as bad or noticeable. However, only time will really tell. We still have 6 more months left in the year, so maybe they'll introduce even more things that help out older units, or even help out units that can't even function, or even newer demote units without PRF, so at least they're able to stand out somewhat. But you'll have to let me know what you think down below. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you later.